As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. In this episode, we're going to change things up a little bit. Rather than having an outside expert to call on, I will be answering your questions about my path to becoming a reluctant prepper.
Our first question for making of a reluctant prepper comes from Liberty Seeker, who asks, tell us about your origins and your roots as a reluctant prepper. Did your parents' upbringing affect your path to becoming a prepper?
Origins. Well, my parents both grew up in poor families in the southern part of the U.S., in Oklahoma, my mother, and Tennessee, my father, during the Great Depression. So that was a major factor in their lives and the lives of their families that affected their worldview, what they experienced growing up. They learned to live through and overcome, and they taught me a lot of those skills as well. Both of them struggled greatly during the Depression to make it through as a family for many reasons, not only financial. My father's family in particular had raised a lot of their own food for themselves. They kept a milk cow and had her calf every year so that she'd come in fresh with milk to provide milk all year for the family, and the calf would be slaughtered to provide veal for the family. They kept a large garden in their city lot and also grew a grape arbor and made many pints of grape jam every year from that. And my grandfather on my father's side was a carpenter by trade and really could fix anything made of wood. He built many additions to their house, their garage, as well as doing carpentry work for neighbors and other businesses in the area, and taught my dad that you can fix just about anything or build it yourself, and it's always worthy to try to repair something rather than just replace it when it breaks. And my dad passed that down on to me, as well as a lot of the specifics of carpentry skills. Also, from the gardening experience my father had as a child, he taught me and my other siblings gardening, as much of a garden as we could put in our city lot, our entire backyard. It started out half the backyard, really ended up being the whole backyard, turned into a garden, and turned all over the dirt by hand. We were blessed with good black dirt in the region of the Midwest where we lived, and put in many different types of crops and tried lots of experimentation with the different things. Learned the hard way that you've got to put sweet corn in large blocks. Just a couple rows by itself don't do well, and learned that field corn doesn't give you what you need either for feeding a family. And a lot of other learnings about enriching the soil, composting that we practiced and learned by trial and error and made part of our family life growing up. Also, repairing things that my dad had learned as a youth, not only extended to carpentry, but also mechanic work. He taught me how to repair bicycle tires and chains, and how to change the oil and rotate the tires and do tune-ups on vehicles. So we even got to the point of changing out transmissions, engines. I finally ended up kind of combining a lot of those learnings and completely rebuilding a car. So a lot of those habits came early from my parents and really from my grandparents, of making do and repairing what you had rather than just throwing it out and buying something new. And on my mother's side of the family, from Oklahoma, her parents expressed and taught her through the experience of going through the Great Depression and seeing the calamities that were caused in the lives of ordinary people, of farmers and of homeowners who lost their farms or lost their homes in the Great Depression, who had their mortgages foreclosed and became basically either tenants or homeless through the process. My mom bore from that a bitter resentment of bankers and of Wall Street financial elite, and really saw them playing a destructive role in bringing down ordinary farmers and families to financial ruin, and taught me what I thought through my childhood and young adulthood was at the time I thought, extreme or unwarranted suspicion and disdain for bankers in general. But later on, with additional learning that I've done in recent years that we've shared some of on this channel, learned that there really is a lot of buyer beware and borrower beware that's quite justified in helping families to avoid taking on unnecessary debt and the dependency and vulnerability that can bring. My grandfather on my mom's side also just expressed great despising the waste of seeing farmers in the Great Depression destroying their own crops or livestock in the face of unbearably low market prices. He just couldn't bear to see that kind of waste of something when so many people were hungry, so many people were lacking the basics that they needed to live and live well. Seeing that farmers had to slaughter their own livestock and throw them in a ditch or burn their crops because they couldn't afford to put any more cost into them because they were such just oppressively low market prices at the time. Also, from my mom, I learned throughout life how to make do and make homemade. She was just renowned for being a genius at being able to combine low-cost, simple, hand-me-down, secondhand, leftover, or free materials and to make for yourself what otherwise you'd have to pay to buy store-bought, and you could save a lot that way and take great satisfaction in the process. So that's some of the origins of my family, as well as the fact that we were recycling back in the 1960s. I mean, when we moved in 1969, my dad and I took a trailer full of the cardboard boxes from all of our moving and took them to a paper mill and weighed our trailer before and after unloading and got paid, good cash money for that large, heavy trailer load packed full of flattened cardboard. And we continued from that day on recycling, steel cans, aluminum cans, sorting out glass into different colors and taking it to recycling center. There was no curbside recycling at all. We had to take it to where we could in different places, to the can company or the glass company, the paper company, for years before it became a common household word. And we were doing composting, as I mentioned, along all those same years as well. So at the hand and the shoulder of my mother and father throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, I learned so many of just organically learned those skills of self-reliance and also avoidance of debt and all the dependency that it brought.
Our second question is from Adam721, who asks, how is it that you became a prepper, and why do you call yourself a reluctant prepper?
Okay, I'll take those questions. I'd like to answer them in the other order, though. First of all, why I'm reluctant, and second of all, how it is I became a prepper. So my reluctance really stemmed from, I think, a lifelong desire to be reasonable. I've always been taught to have a reason for my answers, reasons for my opinion, that it's okay to debate things about anything with people, but that you should be able to stand on reason. You should be able to have something you can point to justify where you're coming from, not just be coming from a place of suspicion or superstition or paranoia, that those aren't valid justifications for taking a position. So in a lot of my exposure to learning about the world and about finances and stuff, a lot of the sources that I was given from a youngest, grade school, I was a product of public schooling, and any exposure that I got to in political science or civics class, anything that even remotely mentioned finances, made it all seem very official and very orderly, and the powers that be had this all figured out. And so I, in some sense, just took on, just kind of a cultural norm of trusting the system. And that's, I feel, what I was taught in many ways. And it wasn't until I actually got burnt seriously, personally, in ways that set me back years of effort and cost me years of backtracking financially as an individual, as a leader of a family, that I started to think that things were not as I had been told that they were going to be, and that somehow this wasn't at all a level playing field, and that I needed to really get some different sources of information. Some specific ways that happened were like during the roaring stock market of the .com boom and so on, when day trading became popularized in the press and everything. I started doing day trading, and I was selling anywhere from 5 to 10 times a day of trades of stocks, sometimes more than that. Winning some, losing some. Always when talking with friends, we'd all talk about our wins, not about our losses, and also get into some stocks that seemed to be just going up and up and up. I know Dell Computer was one of those, and so started buying options on that rather than just the underlying stock, actually doing both. And also then using margin or debt, basically borrowed money to be able to buy twice as much of the stock as I could really afford. All that seemed brilliant when things were booming and going up and up, but all it took was some sharp downturns at times when I had really margined and leveraged with options, and just saw big paper gains just evaporate overnight. One night it was $160,000 disappeared that way, and just you wake up in the morning and shake your head and realize I have no idea what the powers are that control this, but clearly it's not my clever trading that's caused these gains, and it's certainly a lot easier to lose. There were some real hard lessons, learned during that time. There were we got margin calls, regular margin calls, federal margin calls, your last warning kind of thing. And I mentioned some of those spectacular losses on the margin leveraging side, the options as well. And we also tried buying some beaten down stocks, like General Motors when it was down against the ropes, or Bell Labs or AT&T. And some of those just, our GM shares, went to nothing. We thought surely there'll be something fair about this, and no way, The federal government came and bailed them out, got some special new kind of shares, and we got nothing for our old shares. So I started to realize that this was just not going to always work out. And we really saw some of our retirement accounts where I was doing like on an IRA account, self-directed IRA, doing a lot of this risky trading and that sort of thing, just see big reversals and big losses of value, and thought, okay, that's it. Not going to let that happen again. I've learned my lesson. I'm going to play it safe now. So sold off all those shares and got out of margin completely and closed the margin portion of the account, got out of options, and just said, okay, we're going to put all our money into a money market equivalent fund to get some yield, bought some U.S. savings bonds with cash, put more cash into a bank savings account. Thought, there, you can't get any safer than that. And that's where we sat for some time. And then there were some distressingly disturbing news stories that I started hearing. And just paying attention to some of the news sources of information, because I sure was disappointed with some of the results I was getting with some of the old advice I had been following. So started listening to some non-mainstream sources of news, and so started noticing some really disturbing news, such as the U.S. debt risk, really putting our sovereign debt at just unprecedented levels, as much debt accumulated in 1 year now as through the entire first 200 years of our country's history, and that if they defaulted on the debt, then I'd be out in the cold with my U.S. savings bond, just like I was with my GM stock that went belly up when the rules changed. I thought, I don't want that, so cashed in my savings bonds. And then I just started to really bother me. It's like, wait a minute, if my money's not safe in stocks and it's not safe in savings bonds, is it safe in these money market funds? And that's when, after the 2008 collapse, my broker politely informed me that our account had been frozen and we would not be able to redeem any of our funds out of our money market. And after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, they started giving portions of the money back, but never still to this day have gotten all of it back. And I argued with them, but it didn't do any good. They said, no, nobody ever told you that was insured and it's money market equivalent in yield, but not in accessibility or liquidity. It's like, what the heck? So then we started seeing stories about the government of Cyprus doing so-called bail-ins, where they just took some of the depositors' money out of their savings accounts and said, well, we're going to use this and you get government bonds for these. Or in the country of Poland, where they seized overnight private pension funds, or the city of Detroit going bankrupt, or New York City and California being in severe financial distress. And then the final straw was, after having rolled over our IRA, withdrawn the money, paid the penalties, put it into precious metals with a custodian, I saw 2 stories the same day of different precious metals custodians that were not redeeming their members' bullion requests. And it really shook my confidence in depending on other parties. They call it counterparty risk, depending on other institutions, whether it's banks or brokerages or whatever, to manage or hold your valuables for you rather than keeping them in your own possession. I also started listening to some non-mainstream sources of news, and one of those was financeandliberty.com. We're sponsors of that channel because they provide so many perspectives from different guests and experts that they have on there. Started listening to guest after guest after guest be interviewed on that channel, and really started getting an education of things that I was never taught in school, never learned in the workplace, and certainly not from any of the mainstream stock commentators or stock analysts I used to follow around and blogs I used to listen to. Completely different perspective, very eye-opening. Finally attended the Liberty Mastermind Symposium twice, once in Dallas, Texas in June of 2013, and the other in Las Vegas, Nevada in February of 2014. and got to hear a number of different thought leaders and speakers from alternative media talking about these perspectives you do not hear on the mainstream media about what's really going on with our national debt, what's really going on with the U.S. petrodollar policy of keeping us in wars to keep the oil flowing and our dollar being used as a world reserve currency and so on, and really started to feel much less confident in the overall system. And all this lined up with the hard knocks that I had been hurt with and burnt with personally, to where I felt like I've just got to stop putting all my family's eggs into those baskets to just keep getting us locked out or frozen out or ripped off. So those were a number of the steps about why to become a prepper. Part about being reluctant was it wasn't until I had experienced a lot of those hard knocks and getting burnt, or finally started getting some information that correlated with what I'd been experiencing, that I started to realize that I did need to take some steps. The other part about reluctant is, just like when you see the tabloids and it talks about somebody who spotted UFOs or aliens or something, it just seems, even the way it's presented, seems caricatured and laughable. I've always considered myself to be a reasonable person, but I was faced with the fact that I had been being unreasonably risky. I'd been putting my family at unreasonable risk, not only through risky investments like trading in options and margin trading and day trading, but even just investing our whole family's nest egg in the stock market, or even U.S. savings bonds or so-called cash equivalent money market funds, which we found out were all invested in highly leveraged debt on the back end and were subject to intolerable risk. I had to find a way that was compatible with still having a professional life and could take one step at a time that would still increase my family's safety, resilience, and preparedness for whatever may come our way.
Our third question for making of a reluctant prepper comes from Jason S., who asks, could you explain the specific preparedness steps you have personally taken so far and what your priorities are to do next?